Hey everybody, this is Erica Mello and Susan Clinton, and you're listening to Tough to Treat. And welcome back to to our podcast. And in this episode, Susan and I discuss a patient of mine. She actually was, I think, a college softball player who had a lot of symptoms mimicking a classic cervical radiculopathy, pain in her neck, down her left arm. And the surprising thing is that the source of her problem was not her neck. It was close, but it wasn't actually her neck. So listen to this really interesting clinical reasoning process as we take her from the clinic back onto the softball field. Enjoy, and thanks again for listening. Hey everybody, it's Erica Mello and Susan Clinton, and this is called Tough to Treat, and we want to thank you so much for listening to the podcast, and we would really appreciate it if you could, subscribe and download and give us reviews on iTunes. It would mean the world to us.
Good afternoon, Erica. How are you today?
I'm good.
Good.
Winding down.
What are we going to talk about today?
I don't know. So it's funny, I've been listening to the podcast myself, and I was like, darn, these are really interesting patients,
They are, right?
Right? and I've learned like a ton, and so I decided this one, I've had some very interesting patients now, but I'm still treating them, and I don't want to muddle the waters, so I'm going to pick somebody that I treated a couple of years ago. So she was a college student, and she ended up coming to see me from Seattle, basically, where she was getting PT before she went, and was referred to me by a colleague out there. So to make a long story short, she had a history of neck problems. She had an MRI which revealed a herniated disc, and she was a pretty active college softball player.
Okay.
And she was a catcher, and she played first base.
Catcher, huh? That's interesting.
Yep, fielding the ground balls. So her main issue was she couldn't look down because she had a lot of neck pain it was her left side. So basically like a basic cervical radiculopathy, right? So she had the MRI. She was getting therapy back home, wasn't really getting a ton better, but she had to come back east for school. So it was looking down, turning her head to the left. And I said, how do you field ground balls? How do you throw? I mean, she's a righty, so she's throwing and turning her head to the left. She said, well, I just do it. She just kind of pushes through it.
Okay.
So I basically did my sort of whole assessment in standing. Even though they have like a neck issue, and you can tell me even though they have a neck issue,
Sure.
I will look at them in standing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Well, she plays softball on her feet, doesn't she?
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think it's their whole strategy. And she's like, well, don't you want me to get me on the table? I'm like, I'll get you on the table. I just need to see you in standing. You go from a standing position to a squatting position, and then you're playing first base, and you're looking down. And so I need to see the whole body, right? I think it's like a broken record, but it's really important to get the buy-in from the patient on the first visit.
Yeah, well, I like the idea of standing, and like you're saying, standing to squatting, and there's so much else too: standing and rotation, standing and twisting, standing and stooping, standing and diving, and then not to even mention that at some point she has to bat the ball.
Right. Correct. That's correct. And ironically, her to the left.
Yep, if she's a righty. So, there's a lot that's going on into that quadrant.
Right.
But you find.
Yeah, no. So basically, I said, look, let me look at you. Let me look at you move. Okay. So I do. So I have her in standing. I didn't see anything crazy in standing. Not a ton. So, because she was quite tall, I actually got her on the table, and in the sitting position, she had sort of tingling and numbness and pins and needles into her left arm. So what I ended up doing is I said, let me just see how you look down. How do you look at your smartphone? How do you field the ball? We can do it in standing, but she was tall, so I had her just sit in sitting. I had her look down. The minute she did that, she hiked her left shoulder up and her head shifted to the right. And I went, no, excuse me, to the left.
To the left, okay.
Yeah, so she looked down, and then I'm doing with my, obviously with my arms right now, but she hiked her shoulder up, and her head shifted to the right. And I'm like, and she got, some from an impingement, some compression there, and she got pain down into her arm. And I said, okay, let's look at how you turn your head to the left. So she turned her head to the left. The scapula was fine, but what she did was she turned her head to the left, and her shoulder girdle went to the right.
Okay.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Because they were different strategies,
mm-hmm.
different movements, but the same outcome pain-wise for her,
mm-hmm.
right? So she had pain down the arm, pins and needles. So what I do generally is I'll look at something and I'll try to modify the position to see if it makes them feel better. So because the scapula was the big issue for her, looking down was the biggest one, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then secondarily turning her head to the left. So it was something was pulling in that neck, and it was just her strategy probably for years and years. So I said, let me just unload. This is what I tell patients. This is my new thing. I basically just tell them, I'm going to facilitate. I'm going to give you another option for movement, okay?
I love it, yeah.
Yep, I'm just going to facilitate a new movement pattern, and let's see how it goes. So it doesn't get them confused. Like I'm going to unload your scapula and do this. They're not going to know the difference.
Right.
So I said, let's just see how you move, and I'm just going to give you a new movement pattern, give your brain another option to figure it out. So what I basically do is I just get my hand under their scapula, I have them shrug their shoulder, and then they just unload it into my hand. So I'm basically supporting her shoulder blade.
Mm-hmm.
I said, okay, look down. Oh, I have no pain. No pain, no shifting of the head at all.
There's your buy-in.
Right? And she was like, oh my God. But the thing is, it may sound like a broken record, but it was the first thing I noticed.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, let's just get the buy-in because she's been around the block. She's got a busy schedule. She actually came in from the suburbs into New York. So she took the train like an hour and a half to see me. So I'm like, oh God, I got to get the buy-in on the first visit because this girl's not going to come back. So, and we did. So that was that move. And then she's like, well, can I turn my head to the left? I'm like, yeah, you can turn your head to the left. So the scapula was not in a bad position there, and her nervous system for turning her head to the left for that particular move, she didn't really use that strategy, okay? She turned her head to the left, and as I mentioned, she ended up, her whole shoulder girdle just, again, I'm doing this in my head, she turned and she almost literally, her head went left, but her shoulder girdle, her upper quadrant went right. Mm-hmm. So she had that compression.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it sounds like she was trying to maybe untwist from the other direction.
Right?
Or something, but she was going the wrong way. She was actually twisting it up more.
Exactly. And she was pretty resilient, and she's a college student, so these kids aren't, and
an athlete.
And an athlete, okay? And she had an athletic trainer working with her. And, not to belittle athletic trainers, I said, but they're just don't have this clinical reasoning process that PTs have. So I think that, and she understands that, and I basically gave the trainer some things to do, and they did, which was fine, and it worked out well. Mm-hmm. But so anyway, so what I ended up doing with the right rotation, so my whole view is it's generally something is going to happen at the initiation of the movement. So the minute she turned her head to the left, like with the get-go, it's almost like her whole upper quadrant shrunk. Like she's bringing that left shoulder forward. The upper rib cage is turning to the right. Like she's in that sort of protective mode, like those cocoon patterns, right? Mm-hmm. So because of the work I've done with Diane and LJ and the thorax, I went up literally into her armpit, okay, way up there, like at the second rib, all the way up into her armpit. So I said, let me feel what goes on there. I can see everything. I'm going to close my eyes, and I'm just going to feel what goes on, okay? So I said, turn your head to the right, turn your head to the left. And the minute she did that, there was this fullness, her entire left, her upper ribs 2, 3, 4, they were just shifting. The whole body was shifting. And that didn't seem normal to me at all. And that was the first thing that happened. So what I ended up doing there is I just did a little distraction. Same thing. I gave her a little bit of a novel input into the system. So I'm just going to do a little decompression in your upper ribs. And a lot of patients are really ticklish in there. And I will tell you, I've had a couple patients in my career when I'm up there, they almost faint because you're in the thoracic spine, you're in the rib cage, you're in where all that the nervous system up in the upper armpits.
Mm-hmm.
So I've had patients like waver on me because that doesn't. If you're very sensitive nervous system and you get in someone's armpits, be prepared for some sort of sympathetic reaction if they have that type of a system. And she did not. So what I did with her is I just gave her a little distraction. I said, just turn your head to the left. She turned her head to the left. Once again, she had no pain.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, okay, I'm done. So what I ended up doing is, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that before I move on.
Well, no, I found it very interesting what you were talking about getting up into the axilla to really actually get to the second rib, because that's certainly a strategy I have used with when I'm trying to help people restore pump handle breathing.
Oh, yeah.
Is to feel not only what's happening in the front of their chest, but up into the axilla. I'm showing with my hands, of course, getting all the way up as high as you can in there, because you actually can feel where that rib cage begins to narrow.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
As it comes into the higher ribs, it's wider, as you're at rib T6, 7, 8, you're at that wider part. But as you get up, it narrows and narrows, and it really begins to narrow. So you have to kind of go into that soft tissue a little bit on the deep side. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is, it's not only is the brachial plexus there, but you also have the neural crosstalk going on from T1, the brachial plexus, and into the stellate ganglion and the sympathetic chain gang, which sits in front of the transverse processes.
Yep. So
you can get to a lot of rich neurology up in that, and just below that and to medial to that, you're starting to get close to the aorta and the aortic arch and your carotid system, and so there's a lot going on in that upper triangle area through there. So I like the idea how you were just telling people, if you're going to start climbing up into people's axillas, that just kind of pay attention to all the neurology that's going there, because you could you might be triggering a little bit of a vasovagal response, or a a sympathetic little overdrive, or some panting, or not feeling good. So but she tolerated it well.
Oh, she did, absolutely. And what's interesting is because she had been somewhere else for therapy, and at her home, and with the diagnosis of cervical radiculopathy, they were doing like the classic cervical traction and working on the neck and things like that, but it just wasn't helping. Mm-hmm. And I think that watching the person move, watching the thing that makes them hurt, almost validates or does validate why they came in. Mm-hmm. I didn't do like any Sperling's test. I just didn't feel a need to. Because at that point, I didn't think the neck was the source of the problem.
Well, she already told you what positions bothered her. So
exactly.
You have to take her back into those positions.
Totally.
Make it hurt again. If they tell you it hurts when I bend forward and it hurts when I look this way, this is supposed to, okay, got it.
Exactly. No, exactly. And I think that we lose sight of that, because we're so ready to rush to do what we think is going to be the issue before even watching them move, right?
Did she have any nerve root issues? I know she had the pain and the pain and some numbness into the arm. Did she have any motor changes or any reflex changes? So it was basically a sensory.
No, she had a little bit of weakness in the posterior cuff, external rotation.
Okay.
But I don't necessarily know if that was from the herniation.
Or just maybe her imbalances or something in her system. Mm-hmm.
Right, exactly. And she did have that, and I did check that. Thank you for asking. So what I started to do is, I said, look, because she wasn't coming in like 3 times a week or anything like that because of her schedule. She came in once a week, and I treated her for a solid hour because of the fact, she was coming in just once, and it was an hour well spent. So what I ended up doing for the forward bend, okay, I took a piece of Hypafix and Leukotape because she was getting it. She was practicing and working out. Okay, at the same time. So I said, let me just give you something to take some of these symptoms down, give an input to your system, and at least you can practice a little bit with the team, because she was pretty good and they didn't really want to go, God forbid they take time off, So I basically took a piece of Hypafix and then Leukotape, unloaded her scapula, and I just, I took it around from the left side of the axilla, not, the axillary, the mid-axillary line, and just put it up across just underneath her scapula, and I crossed midline, I crossed the spine, and it like I slinged it. It's like a sling, and that's what I did. And then I rechecked her forward bend, and she was fine with that. And I knew that wasn't going to last, but I figured let me just give that to her the first visit, and then I basically gave her on your hands and I said, you're going to get on your hands and knees, okay, and you're going to let your head hang instead of having her sit and do things with her head down. That would be totally counterproductive. I tried to change the context of the movement. So I got on her hands and knees. I said, just, you can drop your head down. I said, how does that feel? And she's like, oh, that's pretty good. I said, good. You're going to drop your head down. You're going to slowly turn to your left. She goes, that feels pretty good. I said, okay, that's your program. That's what the first visit. I unloaded the scapula. I put her on her hands and knees to change the context completely and had her turn her head and, look down. Your basic, simple, well, she could rock back and forth. So we interspersed that, and that's what I did. That was the movement pattern. She's like, why am I on my hands and knees? I said, I need to change the way your brain thinks about these movements, and when you're on your hands and knees, it changes the context, and that's what I need.
Right. I love that, because it's the same movements. They're just done in a different position from a different angle now the upper extremity is kind of in a closed chain instead of an open chain. So that changes the strategy that the muscles around have to do. And plus, when you put her on her hands and knees, different muscles are going to switch on because she's in a different position.
Right.
So perhaps maybe her, whatever was elevating her shoulder, with that compression she was getting on that left side every time she leaned forward. I think you said her left side was elevating.
Yes.
So it put her in a different position to where perhaps it didn't make sense to do that anymore neurologically. Correct. And you didn't have to tell her, sit there and don't let your shoulder come up. Like they're going to be able to do that,
Right. Because she was, she was on 4-point kneel, right?
Yeah.
4 points of contact, and she wasn't, her shoulder blade wasn't hiking because it didn't need to in that position. And so I thought about it, and I said, well, I could probably give her other things. I said, let me just start there. And now looking back on it, I'm just wondering, I always like to do these types of things. This reminds me of some of the stuff I learned when I took some courses with David Butler years ago. How do you change the context of some of these painful movements on patients, right? So she looks down, she turns her head to the left. I thought maybe doing things on a down dog, same thing. You could do that. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on novel inputs, position wise, when someone has an issue with C-spine rotation, things like that. I mean, I had her do like things on the Cadillac where I basically had her, there's a bar there where you basically lean down and then you're slowly turning your head, and she was fine with that. But I always want to think of different movement patterns that I can trick the brain. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you mean. It's one of those things that I challenge myself. I walk in when I'm going to get busy working with somebody, and my challenge is before I put my hands on them, I want to see how much I can do before I have to touch them, that I feel like I have to touch them. And that's just really made me look at them moving just a little bit more. And I have found that if you find something in one position that I think you just need to go to something that you would never, a complete opposite position, to begin to get them to see that. But it's like let me say it this way. It's like a hamstring stretch. If they lay on the ground and pull their leg up into a hamstring stretch, then they sit up and they sit on the side of the table and they straighten their knee. It's the same thing. It's just moving in a different direction. And it's moving from a different position. Or stand and put your hands on the sink and step back till you're at a 90-degree position at your hips with your knees straight. That's a hamstring stretch. It's also a glute activation muscle, because the only way they can come up is to activate their glutes. There's a lot of different things that go on, but it puts them in a different context in order to gain whatever. If flexibility was my goal for them, or their goal too, then you got to figure out several different ways in order to get that to happen, because the one way they're doing over and over again isn't getting it. So you
Yep.
get pain the same way. So that was looking at flexibility. You know, I've stressed
Yep.
my hamstrings this way forever and it never changes. Well, maybe we need to change the context in which you're trying to gain flexibility.
Right.
You know, and I think pain is the same thing. You know, it's like you know, so we have pain, you know, something for whatever reason breaks down. We have a pain experience around it, and the pain experience worsens. And for maybe one of the reasons, I mean, there's always several reasons because pain is so complex, but I think one of the reasons that we can intervene with early is that we continue to move in the same way, even though we're getting the call to action to do something different.
Right.
So if you look at pain as protective, you know, not offensive, but protective, as David Butler and Lorimer will tell you over and over again, that then do something different because it's trying to protect you from doing that same movement. And it's not that you'll never go back to that movement, but if you can get the brain to realize that bending the head down and turning to the side isn't dangerous, then perhaps they won't have as much of a pain experience the next time they go to do it in the upright posture.
Correct.
Yeah. So I love when it comes to the neck and the thoracic. I always go to the thoracic spine, and you know we have a lot of literature out there on regional interdependency or whatever the buzzword is this day. You know, and I thought it was interesting that instead of turning her head maybe to the left, she was actually using a strategy to turn her chest wall the other way. So, you know, and she still was having the problems, you know, so that maybe was a learned pattern from the way she throws. If she's a right-handed thrower, you know, maybe there's some sort of, you know, as the arm goes back and the head goes to the left, that's kind of a learned pattern of that trunk shifting right because the right arm is up behind her head you know, to get ready to throw the ball. And so when you put their hands on something, they actually have to change the way their thorax works.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because all of a sudden now, you know, your hands are in contact. So you could actually even go from, you know, 4-point where you could really unweight, deload, change, whatever you all want to call it out there. There's 1,000 different words for it. I think it's proprioceptive input and sensory input myself more than anything. But you know, you get them in that position, or like you were saying, downward dog. You know, you can always take them up to where their hands are on the wall. You know, straight in front of them, or even to the side. You know, and it changes the whole input because now the arm is on. You know, kind of the hand is kind of on a fixed surface, you know, that cold closed chain thing. So now the rest of the body has to move differently around that, you know, and then you can work into where that, you know, the arm becomes like in dance, we call it the gesture arm, where it's actually moving freely in space and not planted on something. But it's kind of a nice way to break up the movement pattern or change the movement pattern. And once they can get to where in the upright posture, they're not having as big of a pain response, then it's easier to kind of go back and say, okay, now you can go, you know, because she's going to go back to that pattern because it's ingrained in her. That is how she throws the ball. And there's probably absolutely nothing wrong with her mechanics of throwing.
None.
This has gotten, you know, this thing has kind of gotten in the way here. And now everything, you know, going and continuing to do the same things in her exercise program that look just like her, you know, her performance program is probably where things were falling apart for her because, you know, they were trying to turn her neck and get it to move, and rightly so. We wanted to, you know, we want that neck to loosen up and feel better and not impinge that nerve so much or whatever is going on. But you got to look at the rest of it too. And so sometimes we can gain that same idea of getting that neck free and getting it moving better by coming up through a different avenue in the body.
Right. Exactly. So that's what I basically said, I'm just going to go through the back door on you. There's many ways you could end up treating the neck by not actually treating the neck directly. And I think that, especially with people like her who have these persistent issues, you're treating, as I think we've mentioned before, you're treating some compensations at this point. And I know in my own body, I've had so many issues that you just run out of options, and then they're here. They end up in our doors when they run out of options, especially the hypermobile ones. You know, we can compensate so well, and then we just can't anymore. And I think that was partly her issue as well. I mean, if she had this issue like 3 weeks ago, I may not have seen all of that. I don't know. I saw her at a point in time where she had this for a bit. What I also ended up doing with her is I did just some basic yoga, like triangle pose, having her look up to the left with the arm, just trying to get more novel input into that left rotation. And she did that. And the big thing with her was they were in the weight room a lot. So she is basically doing the bench pressing. I discontinued the bench press with her for a bit, because what she was doing is she was kicking her pecs in, some of the like the serratus anterior, which I believe were muscular vectors causing a lot of this rotational issue. And so I said, just don't do the pecs right now, because I think that you're reinforcing a bad motor pattern. Okay, it's not like you're tight. You just are in the gym. I'm not there watching you. And my guess is you're probably benching and you're just recruiting the same muscles that are contributing to your issue in your neck.
So, not to mention if she's doing breath holding strategies while she's lifting heavier weights.
Yes.
And that's all translating up into maybe some different forces into the cervical spine.
Right, exactly. So
eating some of that.
Yeah, for sure. So some of the manual work that I did do, and I'm just looking through here, I did go in and do some work on her pecs, pec minor, inner serratus anterior, just to dampen down some of that tone. They weren't, and it did help, I'll be honest, it really did with her. But what helped with the movements of looking down, for example, the forward bend, was the scap unloading and reinforcing the motor pattern, a new motor pattern in a different position. With the left rotation, because of the trunk shifting that I saw, I did a little bit more manual. I know it sounds like I'm separating the two, but I did more hands-on because of the facilitated pec, the serratus, those types of muscles that were just gripping. And so I did do that, and it helped. And I didn't need to do any joint mob or anything like that with her, because she really wasn't stiff. I mean, she's hypermobile. So, and I think once I did that, we were able to do some more hands-off movement repatterning. I did a lot of things in terms of, I actually had her, because I think she was catching more when I saw her, because she did first base, I had her start doing some squats to intersperse the squatting. So, and she wore, those knee savers that they wear to protect their knees,
right.
So I ended up having her do some basic squatting, from squat, like squat, stand, squat, stand, squat, stand. And she was okay with that, because she wasn't really doing anything with her head. She was just squatting, standing. So then I ended up having her doing I took a ball, we don't have a softball here, but I ended up having her holding a ball and just squatting, and then trying to take the ball, rotate to the right to simulate that initiation of a throw back to the pitcher. So we squatted, we did squat, squat, sit, etc. And then we ended up, I'm showing with my hands here, taking a ball, squatting and rotation, and then coming back and going into full left rotation after that. So, and she did well with that. So I was trying to break the movement up into different patterns so she could train them, and let her brain figure out which one she liked the best. So the best one, from what I wrote down here, is, and if I remember, it was a couple of years ago when I saw her, is when she actually squatted, and then she got up about halfway, started to initiate, the right rotation. She unlinked her hands, and then started moving, and her head turned. It's a complicated move, but once you see it done, she was okay with that, because I had done hands and knees, I had done triangle pose, I had done all of these movements in, not unloaded, but like these phase one, we're not loading the system up with a 5-dimensional pattern here, hands and knees turning right, left. That's not, squatting, sitting, throwing, rotating, that type of thing, right?
Right. I love the progression, because for those who are kind of sitting here thinking, like I am, a little bit about neural tension, because I know people would think, oh, well, you need to kind of work with the neural tension system, and maybe that will change that as well, too. And actually, that's what you were doing.
Yep.
If you think about what Erica was just talking about here, what you were talking about, for those out there listening and thinking, neural tension, what about neural tension? Because you had her in that modified, you had her on 4 points. That's a neural tension position.
Yep.
because the wrists are in full extension, and you've
Yep.
got, and you're changing and you're rotating and changing the head and the shoulder, and the head on the shoulder on the hand, and so all of those positions that we talked about, and then you've moved it into neural tension changes like going into triangle. For those of you who don't know what triangle is, just stand with your feet wide apart and keep your body sideways and lean over sideways and raise your arm up. That's close to it. I mean, there's some other nuances to it, but the idea is as you go over sideways, the arm goes up in the air and your eyes look up at it. So there's some rotational components to it too. And it's basically winding up from the lower part of the trunk and translating up into the upper extremity, into the eyes. But here's the coolest thing: when you took her into squat, because remember a few podcasts ago, we talked about people who are very mobile.
Mm-hmm.
You probably could have taken her. I mean, she's throwing a softball. This is catching. She's got mobility out the. And you already said she tends to be a little bit more on the hypermobile, kind of continuum, not really the stiffer fire hydrant kind of person, but more of the lanky or Gumby type person. And when you have it, it's hard to gain neural tension in people like that.
Yes,
you're like trying
absolutely.
to see, okay, well, if
yes,
you
we
do
did
arm
talk
like
about
this, will that bring that up, right?
Yeah.
So when you take her into squat, you have really wound up the whole lower part of her neural system.
Yeah.
And now you're having her rotate into that position, slowly, carefully, like see where you go, see how you find some new patterns, figure out some new ways to move. Because quite frankly, she may have chosen that one pattern of movement because first of all, it was how she was taught to catch and throw. And the second thing is she got good at it, and it was probably the only way her nervous system could figure it out. So you actually took her in, wound up her whole nervous system again, and then got her moving in all these different novel directions to give her a lot more variance.
Right.
So that, to me, for those of you who want to say, hey, neural tension, there it is. That's an absolutely fabulous, if you're going to follow the neural tension world, here it is from step 1 to step 10. And then the last thing you add, the rotation in, because that's what they need to have. Wind it up in the rotation.
Yeah, it's a great point. I remember we talked about this. I don't remember which podcast it was, but for these hypermobile, actually, maybe it was my guy with the cranium, where I had to wind him up. That was the cranium, I think, the first one. So you have to literally put him in a really wound up position to get any kind of a response. And doing a basic median nerve test and sitting, I actually think I did that. I didn't get anything with that. I mean, with people like that going, you're absolutely right. You need to really wind up the system, however you need to do it.
From the other part, the other, the other piece of
the other end. Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, because of her history and she had still had a little bit of pins and needles at one point, although she was she was good at, after a bit, I said, let me just progress her slowly. And when I got her into the full squat, and I think she was still working out in the weight room, and then she went back to playing. And so I gave her some I don't know, I don't think a reset, I guess we call them reset things, just to sort of help her before she goes and plays again. And I did a lot of it was on her hands and knees. A lot of it was just basic squats, not really winding up the upper quadrant, but just doing just basic squats to elongate the system and shorten it, just up and down, getting that mobility back and forth. And then I ended up doing, what else was I? Oh, on her hands and knees as sort of exercises to do before she started playing, before she got on the field, getting on a bike, and just warming up the legs.
A different kind of warm up.
Exactly.
Gets the system moving in a different direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And I ended up taping her scapula for probably, I don't know. I mean, people, I don't know what you think, but people kind of love the tape if it really helps. And I don't really like to keep it on for the entire duration of treatment, because I think you need to wean them off at some point, and I found that with her, I didn't tape her all the time, but if she had a big game, I would do it because she asked and it's not hurting at this point. But I needed for her brain to figure out another way after a period of time to keep that strategy at bay, right?
Right. Well, basically what you were doing, or at least this is my view. I know can't remember if on a previous podcast we talked about tape. I'm sure we did, but here it is again.
Yep.
Tape is a sensory experience.
Yep.
And what does the cerebellum listen to? All of the sensory pieces coming up from the body, the movement, all of that. All of it goes through the cerebellum. And the cerebellum then sends that up to basal ganglia and says, here's what we're doing. Is this matching? And basal ganglia will say, send it back down and tell them to adjust this way. Error detection and error control. And so the tape is wonderful, I think, if you're looking at it like a sensory experience. We know it doesn't hold bones, right? It just, it's
totally.
The tape stretches the skin and you change the way you move, because it
totally,
it pulls on your skin. And I agree with you. You really want them to be able to kick basal ganglia out of the chair. I say that all the time. Get it up, get it out of the chair, get it looking for some new patterns, create new patterns. Come on, your basal ganglia, your cortical, your higher level. Let's go. Give that, system some more choices in order in which to change. And so once you get its attention, I like what you were saying. You want to actually kind of get them to figure it out on their own too. Okay, you have this, you felt it, you can move without as many symptoms. It's not the tape. It's the tape just gave you some sensory experience, to just remind you that let's move a different way. Let's move a different way.
Right.
Let's move a different way. But at some point, you don't need to always be reminded to let's move a different way.
Right.
Create that pattern. If you get some new patterns in there, then the brain will start shifting and choosing between those patterns. That's what variance is. Instead of having to have just that one piece of tape always telling it. No, remember, now people who are a little bit more persistent, maybe they need to have that. I don't know. There's really no clear answer to that. But I think if you look at it like you are, as a sensory experience that you want them to be able to develop on their own, then I love that conversation around that, because some people, and athletes are superstitious, aren't they?
Yes.
If you tape me, this is going to be good. And so you gotta play into that a little bit. I respect that. I'm not going to change my socks. I'm not always wearing these socks, and the whole locker room is smelling because somebody won't change their socks, or I think here in Pittsburgh, Sidney Crosby won't talk to his family on game day. It's not even a text, because it's like they just won't do it. Another one of the hockey guys, when his family comes, he always scores a goal. So it's like, I hope we always laugh and say, I hope his family's sitting in the bleachers there. But they so that's kind of part of that athletic jam, and you kind of got to go with that a little bit.
And I had no problem doing that, and I think that for her, I think what's important for her, or for the listener, is that she did have, like when she looked down and when she turned to the left, so in terms of treatment, there were two different movement patterns, right? So I did, for the forward bend, it was really her scapula, basically, her nervous system, her strategy, hiking up the shoulder blade. That was the issue there, okay? When she turned to the left, it was a different strategy. So I had to treat them differently. So, like if I just did the unloading of the scapula and then I did some nominal movement for that, I know, in my opinion, is I don't think I would have made as good of progress with the movement of rotation to the left had I not addressed that those upper ribs, the strategy with the shoulder girdle. That's a different strategy. The body does different things when they move different ways. So just because you have an issue with forward bend and you treat that doesn't mean that every other movement's going to get better. That's my opinion, right? And I think that's the misnomer. I think a lot of people believe, okay, I'm going to do a little traction, I'm going to do this, everything's going to get better. That's not true, because turning the head to the left is a completely different movement pattern, and the brain just figures a way out to turn the head. It's very different than looking down and looking at your smartphone or fielding a ground ball. So if I didn't address her upper thorax and the issue in the axilla, right, with that rotation, you can call it whatever you want, I don't think that I would have gotten that rotation to the left better. That's my opinion, and I had to address it via the motor repatterning squats and throwing and things like that. And at the end, they all came together and we did a movement plan that addressed them together. So I did treat them together, but in my mind, I had different patterns for different movements. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It does make sense.
Yeah.
It's like squatting. How many different ways can you squat? The name of the game is to squat. But what if it was a squat? And for her, she not only had to squat but drop down onto one knee, lean back, rotate, and throw the ball.
Right.
And she had to do that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And the squat had to be mobile enough to be able to lean to the right, lean to the left, and wild pitches and batters swinging and all of those different things. And so there has to be, the ability for her to shift into some different patterns.
Yep.
And it's going to make her a better, I think, if we pay attention to the motor control literature, it should make her a better catcher.
Yes.
Over time,
absolutely.
Because she's got the ability to make some changes in some of her, consistent practice patterns. We've gotten really good at some of those, but you also need to be able to be nimble within those patterns of movement. And I think when we start looking at people this way, if we can give them some of that ability to switch quicker back and forth, particularly out of these planes of motions, we can get people a little bit healthier, balance is better, their ability to catch themselves and not fall down is different. And, their ability to access those lovely diagonal movement patterns that how many movement systems are built off of that, since the beginning of time, since before Moses, people were, treating movements and rotations and all kinds of different things.
It's true. You bring up a really good point, because I think that because of the nature of being a catcher or any athletic position for that matter, you need to train them to move in and out of those positions in various ways, and if they've had an injury, you really need to train that. And I would say barring an injury, I think that's a great training strategy, because we need to train side to side, forward, backwards, look at the sway, rotation in all different planes, versus just getting in the weight room and doing bench presses. And those are important for a lot of sports, but I think
it's not the only thing.
It's not the only thing, exactly. And I think with her,
important, but what do you do with that strength,
right? Exactly. It's how you actually can integrate it to a movement pattern that you do over and over again.
So I'd like to just throw this out here, kind of, and Erica doesn't know I'm going to throw this question out here like this, so I'm going to kind of catch her, just to hear her thinking on this. What if this was a 55-year-old female, wasn't a catcher, that had this persistent problem, and she'd been to regular, the normal things that we know to do in the literature for an acute, nerve root impingement didn't work. It got her somewhat better, but not all the way. And so here she is, just like this young lady, but she's not she's not catching, she's not doing all of these athletic things. She likes to garden, and she likes to walk her dog, and she wants to, she wants to go to her yoga class with her friends, and she wants to do, she wants to live her life. She wants to reach into her closet and put on clothes, and and clean under her bed and do these things. And would your strategy of how you looked at her and what you would do, would it change just because we kind of talked about what an athlete needs to do, but what about everybody in their everyday life?
No. If she, the same person, same symptoms, same thing, I probably would have done something similar, to be honest, because in order to garden, you got to get on your knees.
Exactly.
Would I have maybe had a ton of load? No, maybe not, but I would have had her half kneel, kneeling. I would have had her done some reaching patterns. I would have done something similar. Would have had her squat up and down? No, probably not, but I would look at yoga. I would have her start doing yoga poses. I would absolutely do those things.
Yeah. And I think that the point that I'm trying to make here for everybody that's listening is that just because the symptoms happen to be centered around whatever it was, the C5, the one that's it mostly is, the C5, C6 nerve root, doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at strategies of movement for the whole body. Yep. Because oftentimes by changing that, no matter, because I know we were thinking, well, she's a catcher, this is all good, but I don't see people like that, but people are involved in their life, and they're the athletes of their own life. And I think you can look at those things that they, either they're not doing because of the situation they're in, or they're trying to do it and it's killing them, but they want to do it. So whichever it is, you still need to kind of think about, wow, I've got a neck patient, but I've got her on the ground. We're working,
Totally.
we're working like, we're kneeling and we're crawling in the grass and we're doing, stuff that we, it's like, why would I put this person on hands and knees? It's her neck. And I think your patient had the very same kind of comment, like, aren't you going to just put me on the bed and treat me?
Yeah, no, I mean, eventually, I'll get my hands on you, which I did for all the manual therapists after. I did do the releases and I did all that. But I think, the average person, have you ever squatted in a grocery store to look at something on the bottom shelf?
Exactly. How about getting something off of the bottom shelf? Or how about reaching up?
Yes.
I'm a short person, so, it's a challenge for me to get to the top shelf. And if I was having neck pain, it'd be even probably more challenging. But that's a part of life. That's like the gymnastics of my life.
Right. Putting a piece of luggage into an overhead compartment. I get that a lot with patients. And I think that was a great question. And you need to function. You need to incorporate your plan into their life. Yeah. And I think that, with a lot of the research out there with, working deep neck flexors, and I just, for this patient, this wasn't going to help her, to be honest. It's not what she needed to do for her task, her softball, her ground balls, looking at her phone. It wasn't going to cut it, and I think that I love the fact that, the squatting and the movement pattern with the arms was really neural tension stuff.
Yeah.
I probably wasn't thinking of that at the time.
See, isn't that what's so cool about all of this stuff? Is no matter what bend you come from, if you come from a neural tension bend and a hypersensitive nervous system, if you come from a biomechanical bend and movement mechanics, if you come from a strength and conditioning bend, this program hits all of those things.
Absolutely.
So it's all that just shows that we're all integrated.
Yeah.
And it's hard to pull one thing out and say, oh, if we could just get the neural tension piece, then all of this will be better. It's not just the neural tension piece. It was patterning. It was motor control. It was strength and conditioning in a different way for her, a newer way that was going to help her regain and really help her ingrain some newer patterns into her system,
right?
Give her a richer environment in which to throw and catch from. So it's all of those things. It's cognitive. It's it's pain science. We want to move in ways that isn't the same, so that we can expose you to movement that's similar, but is still going to get the job done, and maybe even get you back to that pattern and this pattern too, without as much of a pain experience. So all of that, I just think that's what's so much fun about it all, is you don't have to think about one thing when you're just like looking at movement and really just problem solving. Why are they moving that way, and can we change it? And if it does that change their symptomology?
Exactly. And I think if you can make a change in the first visit via either symptom reduction or or increased movement, that's important, and changing the context is important as well. So I think this has been great. This has been a fun one.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think it's just so transferable too, because we're going to see people with neck problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to see people who have symptoms when they turn their head, and I think it's wise to look at, the thorax turns underneath the head, as we saw in this case,
Yes, and it's interesting though, if you think about it, you have somebody coming in like her, turning her head to the left, looking down, fielding ground balls, and she's moving at that time. And someone who basically sits in their car with their hands fixed on the wheel and can't turn to the left because they have the same symptoms, would that training program be different for her? Probably. She's holding on to a wheel. Would I have her squat? I don't think, probably not. I'm just hypothetically, but you need to look at what requirements of the task at hand that they have an issue with, and just figure novel ways to train it in different ways. Could you squatting, holding on to something, this hypothetical person? Yeah, maybe. But the point is there's similar symptoms, but you have to look at the whole person, and that means what they're doing outside of your office as well.
Exactly.
So
lots of fun.
Yes,
Lots
it's fun. Totally
Yes.
cool. This was a good one.
All right, everyone.
Thanks, you
Give
guys.
us your comments. Give us your feedback. And please, please, please go to iTunes and give us a review. We would really appreciate it.
Yeah, we would. Thank you.
Have a great day, and we will talk to you for our next podcast, Erica.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye.